समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti. Where Swasti Rao, our consulting editor for strategic and international affairs, takes your questions, dear subscribers, on international developments around the world. And we are doing this impromptu session virtually because it's the Republic Day weekend and all the roads to our offices are closed. And we did not want to delay this because there's so much happening globally. And Swasti, there are a lot of questions on it as well. Davos is ongoing, and a lot of our user questions are on that, which is why I will, for today's episode, start with it because it's the key, the key global focus right now. And to begin with, this is a question by our subscriber Brass Tax, who wants to know that why is the USA hell bent on taking Greenland by force? During the Cold War, it had multiple bases and could operate at will. So why does it want to break its 7 decades-old alliance with the Europe?
Well, Devdatta, first of all, thanks for agreeing to recording it like this because we didn't want to miss, which is a fact because we get so many questions and it becomes difficult to then take them if we delay the episode. So, quickly, with regard to Greenland and Davos, I'm sure everybody was looking at Davos primarily to see whether this is going to be an end point or the rupture point for the transatlantic alliance. In terms of what happened, very quickly, no such rupture happened per se. In fact, merely hours after he went all guns blazing, and by he I mean Mr. Donald Trump, he until like last night there was news that he had already agreed to a framework agreement on Greenland. If you remember, that is what I had been saying for a long time, that it doesn't make any sense for Donald Trump to really militarily invade Greenland. It doesn't make any sense. Now, why is he hell bent? Quickly, now we have to understand a few things. There is no doubt about the fact that Greenland is rich in oil, hydrocarbon resources, rare earth, magnets, minerals, base metals, much more than any other geographical area in the world, right?
Right.
Greenland has about $4 trillion worth of oil and rare mineral reserves. But here is where it gets interesting because what Donald Trump is wanting to achieve in Greenland by way of controlling the island because it is important to America's security. The funny part and the puzzling part is that the Americans and the Danes, because of course Greenland is a part of Denmark, and in fact, not just that, there's a tripartite kind of an agreement which was updated in 2004. The original agreement was signed in 1951 when Greenland used to be a colony, then upgraded in 2004 between the Danish foreign minister, the Greenland representative, and Americans, which actually says that America, in consultation with Denmark and Greenland, can increase its military presence to whichever degree it deems fit. In fact, I would urge everybody to not assume that Americans have any real point of view when they say that, oh, we are very worried about the security hole, because they are the ones that walked away. Until about the Cold War lasted, there were 17 to 18 military bases, and these are American military bases all across Greenland. If you remember, in the last episode, I'd also shown how the military bases were actually stressed from the north to south in the island. So the Americans already had about 17 to 18 military bases, and after the end of the Cold War, when the USSR's threat sort of did not exist, then they brought the number down to one. They have already existing legal frameworks where they can go ahead and get back those military bases. Military bases, by definition, are spots or regions where the country that is operating the military base has sovereignty over that patch of land, and those are permanent deployments. Okay, by deployments, I mean both troops and assets. So it is puzzling because Donald Trump is fighting for something he has already been having. And that is what makes it puzzling, right? I mean, today, Europe is fighting a war in Ukraine. Europe is going to give an arm and a leg. And this is exactly the phrase I've used in my column also today, that Europe will give an arm and a leg to actually retain US back into the European fold. But the unacceptable bit is Donald Trump's bluster on violating, Greenland's sovereignty or Denmark's sovereignty. That is something which is unacceptable. But frankly, he doesn't need to do that because there is no conflict. Europeans would want Americans to have bases there. In fact, if you were to count the number of military bases in the Arctic right now, and if you look at the image here, you see that the highest number of military bases that any country has in the Arctic region is actually Russia. Okay, then US has bases, Norway has bases, UK has bases, Canada has bases, but the highest number of bases right now are by Russia. In this particular scenario, and especially considering just how worried Europeans are at the hands of Russia because of the war in Ukraine, they are going to welcome every possible step to encourage United States to again have those bases, right? So this is a this is a very misunderstood kind of a situation where Donald Trump is fighting for something that he already has. The treaty is right now operational. It has not even lapsed. And in fact, to cut a long story short, I would say that frankly, Donald Trump has completely tacoed on the matter of Greenland. It doesn't make any sense for him to go ahead with a military invasion. He cannot go ahead with a military invasion. The Congress, including both houses, the upper and the lower house, okay, so the House of Representatives as well as the Senate, the Congress is never going to give the two-thirds majority or two-thirds approval to anything to do with Greenland's sovereignty. So he knows that he cannot go ahead with it. Back in the United States, some other congressmen are already moving Greenland sovereignty protection bills. So it is impossible for him to even if he takes a decision to go ahead with it. And frankly, where is the need? So why are we discussing about something which is not required? So either he's trying to completely divert attention from something more important, or it now seems as if he has never really done a required background check on what really are the options that United States have. Okay, so right now we are at a position where you see some kind of a sense coming back. Donald Trump has agreed to this framework agreement. I was always of this opinion because, of course, I do study and teach the Cold War history, etc. But yes, Donald Trump being Donald Trump, I don't think this matter is going to get settled very easily. It is going to get raked up again and again. But like I said, that this is something which is absolutely a non-issue, So this is how I look at it.
And Swasti, based on that, there's a question which Yumi has, where he asks that at what point do you expect the Republicans then to disown this kind of, Trumpian politics?
Now, to answer that question, yes. I mean, I think first we need to understand that while United States president is really considered the most powerful democratically elected leader in the world, also because of the sheer economic and military might of the United States, and for that, if you look at how the distribution of powers is there in the United States. So for example, you're right. I mean, the US has a system of checks and balances, which is based on division of powers, which has a legislative, which means a bicameral Congress with an upper house and a lower house, like I was earlier mentioning, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then there is the executive, which is the president himself. And then there is the judicial side, which is basically the courts. Now, very quickly, when you say that how long will it take for the Republicans to disown Trump? I don't think the Republicans disowning Trump is something which is very close. But having said that, we have to understand that much of Donald Trump's bluster is directed less towards Republican politics, because the traditional Republican stance on whatever he's doing in the world is absolutely different from what Donald Trump is doing. Okay, so there's little doubt about it. What Donald Trump basically panders to is the MAGA rhetoric about making America great again. But you do see that whether it is his rhetoric on Venezuela, which was largely supported, but yet there were other senators that went ahead and said that there will be a limit to using the military option again in Venezuela, or whether this is to do with Greenland, or in terms of what Donald Trump plans to do in terms of going ahead against Iran with Israel. So, whatever that may be, you see that not everybody is on the same page. But the proof of the pudding is going to lie when the midterms come. In fact, there is news that Donald Trump has already been saying this to the Republicans, that keep your internal divisions aside. If I lose, or if we lose the midterms, which are going to come in November, the Democrats are going to find a way to impeach me. So he's already started, and this shows that he is not very confident, and he is trying to sort of, create this sense of emergency among the Republicans, saying that I have given, victory to the Republicans and the Republicans are back. But if you do not keep your differences aside, which means, differences on Venezuela, Greenland, so on and so forth, we might lose collectively. So I think the proof of the pudding is going to lie there. And I do see that Donald Trump will not be able to go ahead with many of the unilateral decisions he takes. I think he's a man that is really obsessed with drama, and drama is quite central to Trump's method. And that is why I think everything around Donald Trump comes across as his bluster. Doesn't mean to say that he can actually get away with it. And I think the best thing to see is how his national security strategy did not really match the defense bill that came by way of the National Defense Authorization Act, where you saw that this Congress put severe limitations on what Donald Trump can do and not do.
And Swasti,
Right.
since we are talking about, Greenland, Venezuela, sovereignty, we have a question by Ravi Dhala, who is an IAF veteran, who
Mhm.
wants to understand your perspective on, do great powers actually care about world orders or sovereignty of other countries, or is it that they function based solely on self-interest?
Well, I mean, one has to understand, Ravi, and I'm sure being from the IF, yourself, I think perhaps you have a better understanding of how this dynamic works. So the world order doesn't drop from the heavens as apple dropped on Newton's head. It is not a given. World order is created by great powers and their actions. So great powers actions and great power politics is instrumental to putting a certain kind of a world order in place. So the world order we have today, which is basically largely a post Second World War or post Cold War order, which has been conceived and implemented very much in the reflection of the larger West, is definitely under strain. As far as um, the great powers caring about the world order, no, not at all. I think we have always seen that the great powers have always twisted and turned the world order or international law or whatever system they've put together to suit themselves. The question is if you really are a great power. And here I think we need to understand better that today what we refer to as great powers may not be that sort of equal to each other. So they are not in that sense, they are not equal categories. So I mean, I have challenged that notion earlier, that when you say India's relationship with the three great powers, you're assuming that USA is equal to China is equal to Russia, which is definitely not the case. So you have a very asymmetric sort of a situation where there are powers that are great in one aspect but not so much in the other aspect. But cutting a long story short, I think I would agree that the great powers have not bothered for international law. They have always manipulated the rules-based order to suit their intrinsic interest. The only thing that makes this particular situation a little more complicated to understand is that Donald Trump comes across as the leader of obviously by far the most advanced military and economic superpower, which is the United States of America. But his actions do not have internal or logical consistency. So his logic in the one realm is certainly challenged by his actions in the other realm, and his actions do not and words do not match up. So that is forever keeping us hanging in the middle of an uncertainty and unpredictability. He's not even using when he would taco, when he would not. I mean, these kind of things are very difficult to predict. So that's my short answer. But yes, unfortunately, we have always lived in a world where the might is right. We always try to sort of build more institutions around these situations so that we are in a better situation to predict or control them or to damage control them, but we can only go so far.
Right. And, moving from there to Middle East, because again, we have a bunch of questions on Middle East.
Yeah.
A lot of questions focusing on Turkey possibly wanting to join the Saudi Pakistan Defence Pact, and, questions and queries and concerns around whether there'll be a Muslim NATO, whether there'll be an
Yeah.
option 2.0. And I will begin with Ravi Singh's question first, where he asks that what are the security implications for India in case such an alliance happens, and if Op Sindhu 2.0 were to happen and Turkey was to get directly involved, would it then lead to the invocation of Article 5 of NATO against India? And how can
Yeah.
India then diplomatically counterbalance such an alliance?
Yes, of course. I mean, the minute you hear that Turkey, that is a NATO member, is planning to join another alliance, which also comes with its own collective security guarantees, like a nuclear umbrella, I mean, the first question that anybody would ask is, okay, then how do these two things intersect or overlap, right? How do these two notions of collective security and the responsibility on the NATO part, how does this sort of intersect or overlap with the other side? Now, this is hypothetical, of course. The way I look at it, quickly to your question, right now we do not have any confirmed reports of a trifecta, something like a Turkey joining the Saudi Pakistan Defence Pact. There are talks, there are discussions, but I do not see confirmed reports of Turkey joining it. However, there is little consolation there, frankly, Debdutta, because Turkey can join it directly or indirectly. I can also foresee a situation where Turkey joins it, but with certain conditions that sort of, gives it a bit of a legal leeway, so that these two Article 5s or these two collective security implications do not intersect. So, for example, Turkey joining, but but it is probably not going to be operational during times of, let's say, an armed attack against Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. We can probably get into these kind of, certain conditions, terms and condition apply. I do not know it yet, but it may happen. But the point for us to ponder upon is not about whether this is going to take shape or not. The point to understand is that Turkey has seen an unprecedented rise in its influence across the Levant. And we need to understand that better. Turkey and Pakistan have already been brothers in arms. Several times I have tried to explain why, the fact that we have not studied the Turkey-Pakistani nexus better has always come in the way of our understanding of, Pakistan's air sort of readiness and capabilities, and Pakistan's, exposure to several of these NATO platforms and NATO warfare styles through Turkey. So I have always argued, that, and I've always argued how Pakistan has successfully positioned itself as a revolving door between China, Turkey, Middle East, and the Caucasus. So whether or not it will directly or indirectly join the Saudi-Pakistan defense cooperation is something which is besides the point. Even if it does not formally join it, Turkey's rise in the regions is going to be enough headache for us. And I'll just tell you how this happens. Because from about 2018 to when Assad fell, which is, I think, 2025, in the last few years, you do see that Turkey was constrained by two verticals. On the one hand was the Iran, Russia, and Assad nexus, which was obviously trying to contain Turkey and keep Turkey relegated to its sphere. And on the other hand, to Turkey's, south and Syria's north was this, the Kurdish fighters, okay, that were backed up, the SDF, okay, that were backed by United States, because they were helping United States first keep a check on Turkey. Remember, Turkey is an outlier within NATO, so keep a check on Turkey and also fight against ISIS. And if you recently noticed, last week itself, an unprecedented change has also started to take shape, which is that SDF forces finally have had no other choice but to merge with the Syrian National Army, which means that United States is no longer willing to support them to that extent that they earlier were. In fact, if you know that there's a lot of discussion on how the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are largely Kurdish, are basically very upset with how the United States have let them down, and they have no other choice because they are facing a lot of pressure from Turkey, and they are also here facing a lot of pushback from the Syrian National Army. And Al Shara, despite whatever problems we thought he's going to have, has really done some commendable job in consolidating his power to whatever degree possible. So he is himself, in a very precarious situation. In the north, he has to make do with Turkey. That is how he's cracking down on SDF, and with the US support now, coming more towards Al Shara and less towards the SDF. The SDF don't have choice, so that's consolidation in that regard. And in the south, he has to manage his ties with Israel because that's where the Druze community is. That's where the Golan Heights is. Now, very quickly, what this has led to is that this has led to Turkey's rise in the region. And just as Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been having this rupture of sorts, and there is a question on that as well, so maybe I can answer that together. So just as the UAE and Saudi Arabia are having this rupture because of how UAE's pursuit of its own influence and national interest has come at the cost of a much bigger ally in the GCC, which is Saudi Arabia. And the spat was out in the open with respect to how the two sides were, backing opposing factions in Yemen. And I always told you that this was just a trailer because picture abhi Sudan mein dekhna baki hai, like that. So just as the Saudi Arabia and UAE are having this spat, you see that there is an informal convergence happening between UAE's interest and Israel's interest on the one hand, and Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey joining hands. So with or without a formal defense cooperation, this particular axis is going to work against the interests of UAE and against the interest of Israel. So quickly, from India's perspective, it means a rise in Pakistan's diplomatic profile. Yes, even though it is different from saying that Pakistan is actually getting all those orders that it's been claiming, because we simply do not have confirmation on that. But it doesn't mean to say that Pakistan's diplomatic profile has not risen in that region. One. Two, from India's perspective, it also means that the normalization which was happening at the time of the Abraham Accords during Trump's first term is no longer in visible, so to say, vicinity, because no way under the sun can the Saudi Arabia now normalize with Israel with respect to what is happening. And third, that the rift between UAE and Saudi Arabia is going to grow, is going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. And UAE will have to course correct a lot. In fact, a part of that course correction, a part of the damage control was also reflected in a very, very hurried visit that MBZ recently made to Delhi. He obviously didn't come to only sign a letter of intent, which was very, which did not really have any serious defense deals or something. So obviously he had come to sort of damage control to convince India of the emerging, so to say, tensions in the Middle East. Because remember, from India's perspective, we multi-align, right? We don't want to pick sides. So I think it was all of that was implied somewhere. And those are things that we need to keep in mind, whether or not something formal happens. Because even if something formal doesn't happen, it is not going to stop Turkey's rise in a manner which is going to have direct implications for India by way of Pakistan.
From there, Swasti, we move on to another set of questions since we are already discussing Iran. This is a question by Fab2042 who wants to know that has India then given into the US pressure on Chabahar, or has India acted in self-defense? And what is the difference between the two?
Now, US pressure and self interest, both without a doubt. I mean, I wouldn't say India simply acted in self interest. I mean, India had invested about $120 million. And for a country like India, it is no small money. So, $120 million. There, we created an entity called the Indian Global Ports Limited, particularly overseeing all those investments in Chabahar. And after the US threat of sanctions, if you remember, US said that they are going to put 25% tariffs on anybody that does any trade with Iran. Of course, India had stopped doing trade, at least the oil trade with Iran many years ago when the first set of sanctions had come. Now, these ones, of course, and then they had also threatened India. They had singled out all these entities in the global in this particular entity. So the Indian side had not only disabled the website, but also there was an en masse resignation so that these sanctions, individual sanctions, could be avoided, and a diplomatic, so to say, another showdown with US could be avoided. So how do you deny that there was US pressure? But the second thing is that I think from the way things are, countries, the way they are, distributed in this world order, it's very obvious that they are distributed as per their potential and their leverage and their relationship with respect to each other, which is defined in terms of interests. And interests can be defined in terms of what power you have. So while there is US pressure for sure, but on the other hand, I think it is not just about US pressure. I think India took a decision that India's involvement in Chabahar at the moment cannot substitute for the $200+ billion trade that India has with the United States, and also the fact that Indian companies have far more exposure to the American companies, so that India has taken, it's a call. I mean, it's something you have to choose. There are times when you have to choose, and India took a choice, made a choice. So yes, I think it's a bit of both, frankly.
And from that, Swasti, Sunil now wants to know that what is exactly going on with Saudi Arabia and UAE, and how bad or sliding is the relationship, and do you think that it will essentially get better?
Now, I just told you about what happened between Saudi Arabia and UAE, right? And in the earlier episodes of GPS, I've also gone into details of what exactly I've done an explainer on it as well. Now, quickly, these are two countries, are very important countries of the GCC. They are, Saudi Arabia is much bigger, larger, bigger economy, but UAE is very resilient, very deft, and obviously under MBZ, UAE is also a very, very aspirational and an ambitious country. Okay, they are very quick to turn crisis into opportunities. They're extremely quick to always punch above their weights. And that is how they got involved in several of these proxy wars. Because, like I told you earlier, that UAE started out with this way of sort of not getting directly involved, but utilizing proxies and getting weapons tested. I keep giving this example of them sourcing Chinese drones to be tested against Houthis, using the Sudanese militia for it, etc., etc. And then that's one part, supporting the proxy. The second part is about controlling the financial networks that actually take money to these conflict zones. So Saudi Arabia, basically, everything was fine until about, let's say, 2017, 2019. There was also a very major strategic partnership signed between Saudi Arabia and UAE, which kind of affirmed and etched into stone that these two are the golden couple of the Gulf. But things started to get problematic because their pursuit of controlling the Muslim Brotherhood, which is again an ideology that both these countries have banned because they see them as destabilizing. So in that pursuit, and by the way, Turkey and Qatar support Muslim Brotherhood. So that's another reason why they have so far been on the other side of the divide. Now, quickly, in their pursuit of controlling the Muslim Brotherhood, and especially from UAE's perspective, they went too far. And eventually, in the different proxy wars happening in Yemen, in Tunisia, in Sudan, etc., there emerged a pattern where UAE was supporting factions which had direct implications for regional stability as well as what Saudi Arabia was trying to do. So, to cut a long story short, this is where it started to get worse, and several times it had happened in earlier as well, that when UAE was supposed to, or at least as Saudi Arabia expected, UAE to fall in line, let's say, on decisions with respect to OPEC plus decisions on production cuts, etc. UAE, posited or postured a more independent stance, right? So things had started to go down south from a few years, but it came out in the open from what happened in Yemen. But this is, like I said, this is going to go get a lot worse before it's going to get any better. So this is what has happened between UAE and Saudi Arabia. And of course, this is a very problematic time for the Gulf generally, because just look at the number of destabilized conflicts and destabilized regions that the Gulf is going through right now, or the Middle East region is going through right now. There is obviously a war that Israel has been perpetrating in Gaza, which is already going on, and Trump's board of peace or something is not going to play any role. By the way, I don't know how many of you noticed that when you read the charter of Trump's Board of Peace, it makes no mention of Gaza. Why? Because it wants to lure Israel into joining it. And you know that if there are two people that are Trump's favorite today, maybe three, let's say first two, and then I'll tell you the third one. Two people that are Trump's favorite these days are Bibi and Erdogan. So he wants to create a situation where everybody can join. So he doesn't. So basically, the implication from that is that the Trump's Board of Peace is not going to be able to bring really any peace to Gaza. Then there is also Israeli strikes in Lebanon, which are very, very frequent. Then there is always this impending fear of what Israel and USA might do against Iran. You know, Iran has been burning for weeks now, you know, unprecedented protest, etc. One is, I'm of the opinion that perhaps we will see some real strikes by the United States and Israel against Iran. So that's another layer. Then you see the Syrian National Army fighting the SDF forces, and that is another layer of violence. Then you see, apart from all this, then you go towards the south, you see what is happening in Yemen. That's another layer of violence, etc., etc., etc. So, and this situation from India's perspective, how does India, that has been traditionally multi-aligning with several powers in the Gulf, including Iran, etc., recalibrate? So, in my opinion, India's position is going to get tilted more towards UAE and Israel, which is the right thing to do, frankly, from India's perspective. But I do not agree with analysis that says that India is going to join any overt defense pact with UAE and Israel against the rest. Because remember, India's aspirational corridor, connectivity corridor called IMEC, it needs both. It needs engagement with both UAE and Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia was the only country that had actually committed any money to the project, which again is in doldrums. But what I'm saying is that's one. Second, India has genuine interests with both Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Okay, so no way under the sun is India going to take obvious sides or formal sides, but we will see that India is going to get a little tilted towards the position of UAE and Israel for obvious reasons.
And following up on that, Swasti, there's a question by Ahad where he says that you have repeatedly been saying that China would play on the front foot this time if Iran and Israel were going to go to war again, like we just discussed. Then do you still believe then that given that China did not do much for Maduro and Venezuela beyond lip service, do you think that China will actively help its allies during wars, even when it has investments worth billions of dollars in those countries? And is it because they are not as militarily powerful as US, or is there some other reason?
No, well, the one thing is that China doesn't believe in getting involved with wars directly outside its theater. Okay, so that's the Chinese character. Okay, that's the Chinese statecraft. China will not get overtly involved. China is not going to deploy its planes against, bombing a country or something like United States frequently does. That's not the game that China plays. When I say that China is going to play a bigger role, very quickly, one key difference between Venezuela and the Middle East is that while in Venezuela, you do not see, there was some, of course, weapons from China, but you do not see like a major role of weapons from China. But in the Middle Eastern region, and thanks to countries like UAE, we were just discussing the Emiratis, thanks to these countries, they have been sourcing Chinese weapons, drones, etc., and battle testing them in their proxy wars. So, because the Middle Eastern region, the North African region, and the Sahel region, okay, of Africa, the central, that belt of Africa, okay, is so prone to proxy wars that have been pushed by these rich countries of the Gulf, particularly the Emiratis and the Saudis. Most of the weapons that are being used there are being sourced from here and there. So, of course, there is, illegal Russian arms, etc. But there's also a lot of Chinese weapons there. That's the first part. The second part is that when I say that China would be playing a more important role in the round two, as I've been saying, because you referred to a few tweets that I made. Yes, please understand that China is not going to come overtly in providing weapons and providing ammunition or something, but there are several networks through which China can do that. And for example, I have in some of the previous episodes of the GPS, I have also gone on record saying that one of the last battles that Israel is going to fight against proxies, against Iranian proxies, is going to perhaps manifest in Iraq. Nobody's talking about Iraq right now. We are constantly talking about Lebanon and Syria and so on, but Iraq. There are a lot of things that China gives to Iraq. There are different ways in which China can do it, and like I said, that there already is a very strong network of these proxies that are sourcing weapons from here and there, directly and indirectly. Uh, Getting not just complete weapons but subsystems that can be then integrated in these different parts, and that can be used by Iran. China is going to capitalize on the already existing networks of proxies that have been sourcing its weapons and drones and testing them, and the subsystem integration that China can do via different actors which are already present in the region, that actually doesn't put China in the spotlight and yet helps China do all these things.
And before we end this session, Swasti, there's this one final question by Narendra Arya where he says that Quad is anti China and BRICS is anti USA. Now, India is a part of both these groups. Is it helpful for India or is it not?
Several times, Devdutta, I've taken this question. It's very interesting how sort of people perceive India's relationship with all these countries. See, India is going to multi-align because all middle powers multi-align. Why? Because multi-aligning brings them benefits that aligning with one country is not going to get them. So there's a reason why middle powers, wherever they are. I mean, look at the Gulf, look at us, look at uh, Latin Americans, look at whoever. You will see that they will Africans. You will see that they are multi-aligning with everybody. They don't want to sort of lose the benefits coming from one side because of their alignments. That's one. So India is going to multi-align. The question to ask is that is India's multi-alignment an equal distribution or is it a skewed distribution? I do not agree with this hypothesis that India can have India is equidistant in terms of its relationship with all the countries around it, or all the great powers, so to say. So India's relationship with US is equal to India's relationship with Russia, India's relationship with China. I mean, obviously not. India today has interest with the US. China is sitting on a territory, challenging our territories. Has absolutely, it's a stated aim of the CCP to contain India's regional rise, to lead and dominate an Asian order and an Indo-Pacific order led and dominated by China, competes with us in the global south. So while Donald Trump has sort of blurred these lines between who aligns with whom, but having said that, it is not the same as saying that India's multi-alignment is an equal distribution. It is not. India's multi-alignment will continue, but India's multi-alignment can be made sense of only when you're able to stratify our interests. So there is a stratification of interest at play analytically when we say India multi-aligns. Yes, India multi-aligns, with the US. Yes, India multi-aligns then with BRICS. But frankly, you have to ask yourself what exactly is it that BRICS is bringing on the table. Okay, so BRICS is bringing to us one big opportunity to engage with the global south countries because it is larger commitment of our global south aspirations. I think global south is again a scam. Let's drop this habit of using global south. It does not mean anything, but a lot of times when one lands up using these words because they are very acceptable in the public discourse and people are identifying with these terms quickly. It is not the same. India, I have always been on record saying that India should be very wary of doing something on the BRICS platform that frankly lands up benefiting China. Okay, I mean, you have to understand that it is China that dominates the BRICS discourse. When you say a de-dollarization, when you say a BRICS currency, you're basically talking about a currency which is going to be dominated by the yuan and not the rupee. So, and that is the reason why India has always rejected any such fiscal developments which are against India's interest. But to his question, what we need to be careful of, especially in the Donald Trump era, is that it is now proven. Earlier, when Donald Trump had come and when his rhetoric was all over the place, it was more of a hypothesis. Now it is proven that under Donald Trump, and his coterie, India's room for multi alignment and India's room for strategic autonomy is going to be severely restricted. Whatever has happened in Iran, whatever has happened, in other places of the world, I mean, all the tariffs, and yet we are not able to substitute the United States. We can't simply because the ties are so deep. It shows that there are severe limits. What we need to watch out for that this multi alignment doesn't land up canceling the benefits of one against the other. So if you are able to play a wiser, I would say more clever game with multi-alignment, I think middle order powers win multi-align, middle order powers. And the second thing we need to watch out for is that in an era where everybody is multi-aligning, you also lose your comparative advantage with respect to that multi-alignment, okay? Because whatever you were getting first is something that is not exclusively yours. So there has to be a recalibration. These terms by themselves do not mean anything. And I think the only thing that is going to lend any logic to this argument is the stratification of interest. So you have to pursue one interest before you pursue the other. Okay, so that I think stratification of interest is going to lend like a logical consistency to this argument.
On that note, Swasti, we come to an end of this episode and we look forward to our questions for next week. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.